I always thought if Nyx Rowland ever found me again, it would be with a bullet, not a question. Instead, the door to my motel room opened on a hiss of rain and bad luck. The place smelled like chlorine and old coin laundry. Sticky tile under my bare feet, a rusty air conditioner rattling like it had opinions. Neon from the car wash across the lot kept pulsing red through the slats of the blinds, painting the bedspread in cheap police lights. I'd fallen asleep in my jeans with a hand under the pillow. No gun, just a screwdriver and a phone I'd broken myself because paranoia likes souvenirs. "Good evening, Asher," he said. No bang, no shout, just a voice like an expensive knife, thin, precise, surgical. I rolled onto an elbow and looked up at the man the city called an empire when it was feeling poetic. Dyed the same dark as a thundercloud suit, collar dry despite the weather. Nyx Rowland carried nothing but a small umbrella folded neatly at his side. His hair was slicked back, as if even the rain didn't dare. "You're late," I told him. My mouth worked before caution did. It always had. I ordered room service 3 years ago. One corner of his mouth threatened to remember how to smile, then didn't. He shut the door with that quiet finality people pay lawyers to learn. The air thickened, not with fear, no, not yet, but with the weight of him. Alpha, in a room the size of a closet. My skin prickled. Instinct is a petty tyrant. "You didn't flinch," he observed, stepping forward. My heartbeat vaulted, uselessly. "You're not a killer," I said, and tasted metal anyway. "You're a disappointed investor." His eyes tracked the cheap lamp, the peeling wallpaper, the toothbrush drying in a glass like a white flag. He took in every exit I'd tested, every suitcase I hadn't unpacked, every corner my shadow had learned. 3 years, he said softly, as if he were cataloging a loss on a balance sheet. "You like to run. Sprinting keeps you young. Lying keeps you alive. Both can be true." He stopped at the end of the bed. The umbrella clicked against his shoe. He smelled like rain that had decided to try cologne, and succeeded. My throat tightened. I told my glands to behave. They didn't take orders. From me, anyway. "Get up," he said. A command, yes, not barked. Set down like a glass on marble. I swung my legs over the side and stood. My knees didn't buckle. I'm proud of that. "Turn around," he added. I did not. "Why? Going to pat me down for serrated wit?" "Turn," he repeated, and I did. Because the little rational voice that gets smothered by adrenaline sometimes manages to wriggle free. His hand skimmed my sides, impersonal, clinical, until they weren't. He found the screwdriver and plucked it from me like a thorn, dropped it on the dresser with a clatter. His fingers brushed my pulse. I felt something electric jump between us, and I hated it for choosing that moment. "You're shaking," he murmured. AC's dramatic. The unit rattled obligingly. He stepped back. "Let's go." "No cuffs?" I glanced at his empty hands. "No chains?" "You're ruining my expectations." He considered that. Then my face, which has been described, charitably, as punchable. "You don't need cuffs," he said. "You need a destination." "You have one in mind?" "Home, not mine." He opened the door. The rain did a slow sweep across the lot, silver threads under the neon. He didn't touch me as he led the way. I followed him because I wanted to, and because I didn't, and because those two truths braided into something like gravity. Outside, the city leaned in. You could feel it through the damp, the hum of late-night diners, the buzz of tires on wet asphalt, the quiet predatory attention of a sector that had just found the last missing piece of a story it had been telling itself. I'd always been good with systems. I knew when I was inside one. The car door opened its mouth and swallowed me. Leather, warm, screens asleep. A soft glow dashboard lit Nyx's profile in blues and greens. The rain slid down the windshield, 1,000 tiny counts against glass. He folded the umbrella, sat, and the space shrank again, except this time the edges were upholstered. We pulled out. The motel vanished in the rear view, replaced by the long black ribbon of highway and the city's spine of lights. Neither of us spoke. Nyx drove like he negotiated, calm, deadly. the lane changing for him because it made sense to. 5 minutes of silence, then 10. My heart learned the rhythm of the wipers, and the panic that had been trying to chew its way out of my ribs calmed down enough to grow bored. "You could have sent someone," I said finally. My voice sounded like gravel soaked in rain. "I did, and yet, they failed," he said, as if that were a thing that only happened to other people. "I don't delegate closure. That, a Rowland motto? Put it on the mugs." He didn't answer. He reached to the console and tapped a button. The speakers woke, and a melody slipped out, low, restless piano that looped back on itself like a thought you couldn't solve. My mouth went dry. Of course it was that song. I stared at the windshield. The rain tried to tattoo the city onto the glass, and failed. The piano threaded itself into memory whether I wanted it to or not. A warehouse with bad lighting, and worse. Company, a laptop row of blinking cursors. Nyx's hand on the back of my neck. Not possessive, not then, just grounding. His breath at my ear as he said, "Now," and everything going sideways. "Subtle," I said. "Do you bring all your ghosts on first dates?" "This isn't a date," he said. "Right. I forgot the flowers." He cut me a look. An old habit trying to be a new one. "You've had 3 years to practice your jokes." "I had 3 years to practice disappearing," I said lightly. "Turns out, I'm better at one than the other." "Disappearing?" He returned his eyes to the road. "You leave a trail. Everyone leaves a trail. I just convince mine to lie." His knuckles tightened on the wheel. A tiny human tell. I cataloged it, because cataloging was safer than shaking. He wasn't wearing a ring. He'd never worn a ring. Power didn't need formal jewelry. "You belong to me," he said then, quiet as fog. "Not for scent, for debt, for pain." My laugh came too loud and too quick. "Good news. I travel light. That part of you never did." "What part is that?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The car filled the silence by itself. I let my head rest back against the seat and watched the city get closer, taller. The wet black facades reflecting our headlights like we were already a memory. My chest felt hollowed out and inconveniently alive. Instinct said, "Submit." Pride said, "Crack a joke." Both were cowardly in their own ways. "You're not putting a collar on me," I said after a while. "I don't need collars," he said. "I have consequences." Catchy. "You should embroider it." He exhaled, the sound almost like a laugh and exactly not. "You used to make better threats. I used to work with better material. That what you call betrayal?" His tone didn't lift, didn't sharpen. He said it like a statistic. I swallowed. I'd had 3 years to decide what word to use for that night. I'd collected dozens. None tasted better. "I call it a choice," I said. "Do you?" He let the words sit between us like a case file. "You cost me millions. And a face." His jaw flexed. "You cost me more than that." "Then by all means," I said, and held his gaze even though my instincts begged me not to. Even though the air in the car grew heavy as if storm had crawled inside it. "Collect." He looked away first, not out of surrender, but strategy. The city unspooled. We drove into its throat. We stopped beneath a tower of glass that stabbed the low clouds and made them bleed light. I'd seen pictures. Everyone had. The Rowland penthouse sat at the top like a crown that had opinions about gravity. Nyx killed the engine. The piano died mid-phrase. He got out. I followed. The rain had thinned to a mist, the kind that coats your skin without asking. Security melted out of the walls in suits that cost more than motels. They did not touch me. They didn't have to. The doors opened like a magic trick, and we were inside. Marble, steel, a lobby that pretended it was a museum. In the elevator he pressed a key, and the numbers skipped. The mirror caught us, a tableau. Me, damp and stubborn. Him, immaculate and inevitable. I watched his reflection instead of his face. Safer that way. "You're awfully calm," he said. "You're awfully theatrical." The elevator sighed open on a floor that felt like air had been ironed. His place smelled like clean money and glass cleaner. The windows swallowed the city, or the other way around. I couldn't tell. Make yourself at home, Nyx said, which is something people say when what they mean is remember whose name is on the deed. I toed off wet shoes out of habit and spite. My feet made no sound on the dark wood. He crossed to a bar that probably had a passport. I crossed to the window and put a hand against the cool glass just to prove I could leave fingerprints on something he owned. Behind me, liquid moved. Whiskey? He asked. Got anything cheaper? Wouldn't want to be accused of theft. He brought one glass anyway. I didn't take it. He set it down. The space between us hummed. Sleep, he said. We work in the morning. You owe me a system you broke. And if I refuse? He turned, slow, like a page, and met my eyes. Then you'll learn something about me you should have learned 3 years ago. What's that? I don't like refusing. I held his gaze. I felt my heartbeat everywhere at once, as if my body had turned into an alarm. I smiled, small and feral, because that was the only weapon left that didn't leave marks. You still tremble when I smile, I said. For a fraction, his fingers moved, barely, on the rim of his glass. Then his face closed. Then he drank. Good night, Asher. Good night, Nyx. I stood at the window and watched the neon far below, breathing until my chest stopped trying to jailbreak. The city looked different from up here, less like a maze, more like a circuit board. I'd always been good with systems. I memorized the lock patterns on the hallway doors. I mapped the cameras I couldn't see. I cataloged every piece of furniture that could become leverage, and every shadow that could become cover. Then I laughed, quiet, disgusted, fond. No cuffs, no chains. A destination. The view from his penthouse was worth millions. My freedom? Slightly less. Morning arrived in a sheet of pearl light that made the city look almost gentle. The glass walls were an aquarium, and I was the fish pretending the ocean wasn't outside. Far below, the sector moved like a single animal, traffic lanes and couriers and board security teams flowing with pack precision. Up here, everything was quiet enough that I could hear the hum of the building's heart through the floor. Nyx watched me watch the city. You can leave, he said, as if discussing coffee. If you can get past my people. I looked at the door. At him. At the elevator I'd mapped by reflection last night. His tone was generous. The conditions weren't. So, a field trip. I padded across the cool wood barefoot, because pettiness is a lifestyle, and opened the door. The corridor was the sort hotels envy, carpet that swallows footsteps, art that looks expensive because you don't understand it. 2 doors down, a black dome eyed the hall like a bored god. I lifted a hand, waved, and kept walking. By the elevator, I pressed the call button and waited. The doors slid apart with a sigh. Inside, 2 men in suits stood with the public stillness of trained furniture. They were the kind that probably had names like Mr. Park and Mr. Park. Their wrists bulged very slightly at the cuffs where serious watches live. Morning, I said, friendly as a trap. Good morning, sir, the taller one returned, polite as a fence. I lifted a foot to step inside. The shorter one shifted just enough to remind me that bodies make excellent barricades. Not a threat. Just geography. Is this the part where we pretend I got lost on the way to the pool? I asked. No pool on this floor, sir, he said, and his mouth tried not to smile. I looked at the elevator panel. No buttons. Only the slot for a key. The doors stayed open, as if waiting for a story they already knew the ending to. I put a hand on the frame, leaned in, and whispered to the empty panel. Take me to freedom, please. Silence. The taller Park cleared his throat. Worth a try, I said, and turned around, letting the elevator close on my reflection. On the walk back, I counted cameras I had confirmed last night, and the 2 I hadn't found both hiding in the ceiling line and smirked purely for myself. Nyx was exactly where I'd left him, in the living area, tie loosened half. An inch, sleeves unrolled, reading something on a transparent tablet. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't need to. Quality control passed, I said, breezing past him toward the kitchen because I wanted the cupboard doors to slam. They didn't. Smart hinges, of course. Your men are very polite. I'd rob a bank with them. You already did, he said, without looking up. That was one bank and a moral lesson. I found coffee, blessedly black, and pretended it was a victory. I let the mug warm my fingers, then leaned against the counter like I lived there. So what's today's unit of penance? Polishing your penthouse with my tears? Work, he said. We start with the surveillance backbone. You broke it 3 years ago. I improved it, I corrected. By demonstrating its vulnerabilities. You set it on fire. Semantics. He finally met my eyes. Fix what you broke. You could hire anyone, I said, because the line had been waiting. But you chose the former traitor. Savior complex? Efficiency. A beat. Trust. That one nearly made me choke on the coffee. I set the mug down before my hand broadcast anything embarrassing. Adorable. I left the kitchen and followed the faint thread of ozone to the room where the building kept its secret brain. Not a dungeon, this was Nyx, not a fairy tale, but a study with teeth, sleek desk, wall, of transparent screens asleep in a grid, a nest of fiber humming under the floor. Someone had upgraded since I last touched these wires. Someone had also tried to hide that upgrade from me by keeping the interfaces clean and the documentation absent. Cute. Robe? Nyx asked, lingering in the doorway. I looked down at myself. Silk, the color of polished ink, collar careless, belt loose. It had been hanging in the wardrobe this morning with the arrogant assumption of a solution. I had put it on because it was soft and because weaponized nonchalance is still a weapon. You're welcome, I said, and sank into the chair. The screen woke under my fingers with a soft bloom of code. Sit there and glower if you must. It's part of your charm. He didn't sit. He stood behind my left shoulder at an impeccable distance that still managed to fog my instincts. The scent of him edged into the air, clean, restrained, something like cedar had learned to keep secrets. My body, in its infinite wisdom, leaned toward it like a plant to light. I corrected my posture and told my spine to stop auditioning for someone else's guidance. Lines of architecture unfolded on the glass, camera clusters, node, relays, access points labeled with tenant codes and innocuous names. Underneath, the bones I'd built, then broken, the back doors I'd left, the ones someone had patched, the ones they'd missed. Do you remember your route? He asked. Do you remember your manners? I flicked a panel, expanded it. Of course I remember. We're arguing about something else. What are we arguing about, Asher? I angled the screen so it reflected his face for me, not the other way around. Whether you drag me here because you needed a coder, or because you needed me. Don't flatter yourself, he said, and the air pressure changed 1/2 degree. I'll outsource it, I offered helpfully. Flattery as a service. The first vulnerability opened with less resistance than I expected, either because whoever patched it had been rushed or because they thought the presence of Nyx Rowland in a room was deterrent enough to hubris. I murmured a greeting to the ghost of my code and began stitching it into something that wouldn't collapse when tested. You're good, he said eventually, like a scientist admitting a fungus was interesting. I'm the best, I said, without shame, which is why it was adorable you pretended I could vanish forever. You left a trail. I left a map written in a language only one person reads, I said lightly. Congratulations on your literacy. He tasted that, decided not to swallow. You should eat. Is that an order? An observation? Fine. Observe me later. He stayed where he was. I sank deeper into the work. The flow took me. The clicks and slides and low chime of the system yielding in intelligent increments. It felt like playing an instrument I'd built myself, like memory uncoiling its spine. Occasionally, an error bloomed red, and I nipped it clean. Occasionally, my pulse caught because he leaned closer to see a line, and the scent of him struck the place behind my ears like a match. Stop it, I muttered. Stop what? Existing at nose level. A pause. I'll try to grow taller. You could stand to be shorter. For morale. Whose? Mine. He hummed, a sound that did nothing to my nervous system, except lie. The room warmed by a degree, or I did. The robe slid along my shoulder as I reached, cool silk against too warm skin. You look, he said, and stopped. Dangerous sentence for an alpha. Different, he finished. Different from which time? From when you left. I didn't look at him. You mean, when I ran? Words matter. They do, I said, and opened the next panel. That's why you chose belong last night. Silence. In the glass, his reflection steadied, then blinked as if clearing rain. Hours, minutes, something later, the backbone made a soft, satisfied sound systems make when they know they can breathe again. I let the chair rock back and flexed my fingers. Congratulations, I said. Resurrection complete. Try not to set it on fire this time. It was you who… Semantics, I reminded him with a smile that tasted like victory and old ash. He moved then, finally circling the desk to stand in front of me. Too close to ignore, too far to accuse. The city climbed the glass behind him like a living graph. He studied my face the way people study weather, not to understand it, but to avoid getting wet. You could have left, he said softly. At the elevator? I did, I said. In my head. The trip was underwhelming. Something flickered. He stepped closer, not quite into my air, but near enough that my body made unhelpful decisions about breath and heartbeat. I felt heat climb my neck, slow as a blush that had filled out paperwork. Instinct said, tilt your head. Pride said, stare him down. Common sense said, stop existing. I compromised by smiling. You still tremble when I smile, I whispered. For a second, a stolen, exquisite second, his fingers betrayed him on the stem of the glass he hadn't realized he was holding. The tiniest tremor. Then he turned so cleanly, it was almost choreography, crossed to the bar, and poured wine with the kind of care people reserve for detonators. Behind him, I let my lungs restart. Dinner at 7, he said, voice restored to its usual expensive neutrality. Romance is dead, I murmured. We'll bury it with the appetizers. He lifted the glass, let the light climb the red. Work again at 9. Look at us. A schedule. He didn't look. Welcome home, Asher. I looked at the city. I looked at the reflection of his shoulders in the glass. I allowed myself one deep breath of assent. I shouldn't have known like this. And stood. Don't get attached, I said, and it came out lighter than I felt. Too late, he said to the window. Or the wine, or maybe to the piece of code I'd laid like a heartbeat back into his empire. And then he drank. It's not the locks that keep you here. It's the eyes watching every breath you take. Night made the glass walls into a second apartment, the city out there, and inside it, our reflections, me in the ink. Black robe, Nyx in a shirt that refused to wrinkle, rain writing the same sentence on the windows over and over. The penthouse hummed, like an animal asleep with one eye open. I walked the perimeter with a mug I didn't drink from, and counted the cameras you weren't supposed to see. People always think cameras announce themselves with little red dots and gilt. These were freckles in the architecture, black domes tucked into ceiling coves, a thread-thin lens where the window met steel, a pinprick above the hallway art. My skin recognized their stare before my brain did. Omega nerves learn audiences early. At the end of the corridor, the lights dimmed for night mode. Beyond the elevator bank, a service door breathed out conditioned air. I angled my body with the laziness of a cat and let it swing open just enough to hear the men on the other side. Boss isn't sleeping again, one voice said, the consonants careful. Watching him work. Which one? The other asked. A brief silence. Both. Rain stitched the pause shut. I held my breath until my chest burned, then exhaled slow. So Nyx had sat up and watched the code flow under my hands like a current he couldn't swim but refused to ignore. Of course he had. He didn't delegate closure or curiosity, or the soft addictions that look like control from a distance. I let the door ease back. The corridor returned to its quiet theater. On the way to my temporary bedroom, I palmed the hall camera, 2 fingers, quick, and felt the faint static of its attention. Good night, I told it, because manners cost nothing. Sleep came late, morning came earlier. The rain graduated to a mist that made the skyline look like it had kept a secret too long. I dressed down on purpose, thin t-shirt, soft pants, the robe tied lazy, and followed the smell of dark roast to the kitchen. Nyx was already there, making breakfast look like a board meeting. Plates waited on the counter with military patience. He handed me coffee without touching my fingers. I took it without saying thank you out loud. You miss my mistakes? Or my face? I asked, because small talk is just foreplay for cowards. Your code, he said. I leaned a hip against the counter and let the steam fog my mouth. Liars should look people in the eye, you know? He did. There was a microsecond where the pupils widen and the air decides whether to thicken or move on. The scent of him, clean and restrained and threaded with heat, pressed against the inside of my nose. My pulse stuttered and then pretended it had always been playing that rhythm. Eat, he said. Observation or order? Both. He slid a plate in front of me. Scrambled eggs that looked like an algorithm had proofread them. Toast the exact shade of acceptably near burnt. I took a bite to prove a point I hadn't decided on yet. The counter was warm under my forearms. His presence at my side was warmer. We didn't talk for a minute. We listened to the city circulate far below, the arterial rush of it. He'd taken off his watch. The pale line on his wrist made him look almost human, which was rude of him. Your people gossip, I said. Everyone does. They said you watched me work. He didn't blink. I watch my systems. I'm a system now? You always were. That sounds affectionate or insulting. I can't tell. It's accurate. I looked at him over the rim of the mug. There was a crack in the chill this morning, hairline but visible if you knew where to look. I did. The part of me that never shut up leaned toward it, tongue on a chipped tooth. The smarter part, the one that saved people who didn't ask to be saved, took a fast inventory of exits. The thing about alphas, proximity changes physics. He wasn't even touching me, but his nearness made gravity greedy. My body wanted to behave, and by behave I mean misbehave, and I hated it for not asking me first. Heat rose under my skin like I'd swallowed a stupid star. My scent tried to climb out of me, eager and humiliating. Stop it, I told my glands under my breath. What? Nyx asked. Not you. I forked another bite of egg like it had wronged me personally. Biology. He nodded as if that were a business metric he could adjust. Maybe he thought he could. Maybe he could. He moved half a step closer to reach the salt. The air between us woke like a nerve. I kept my eyes on his hands. Long-fingered, deliberate. Hands that signed things into reality. Hands that, 3 years ago, had braced me in a doorway while a decision detonated between us, and he whispered now into the hinge of my shoulder. My stomach did a treacherous little cliff dive. I packed sand on top of it and smiled. You're very calm, I said. You're very loud, he answered, meaning my scent, meaning my skin. A condition, I said lightly. Terminal. That remains to be seen. He took his coffee to the table. I followed out of stubbornness, set mine down too hard, and winced when it sloshed over. He handed me a napkin without looking like he was handing me anything I hadn't earned. Do you regret it? He asked. Which part? Leaving. Running, I corrected. Because words matter. No. A beat. Lying? Strategic narrating. Cost me millions, he said. But the edge was blunted this morning, dulled by something like thought. And a face, I said back, because we'd rehearsed these lines enough they were almost safe. He studied me the way you study weather on a day you want to leave the house without a jacket. Calculation. Resignation. Hope disguised as denial. Something almost soft unhooked under his sternum, if the way his shoulders eased was any indication. He is the same, he was thinking. Or, I put the thought there for him, because I needed it to be true. He is the same. Without fear. Or maybe that is a mask too. I stood, because sitting, let the air win. We working or talking? Working, he said, as if talking were a luxury item he'd return to the shelf. We migrated to the study. Screens woke like cuttlefish changing color, shy, then vivid. I slid into the chair and let the grid wrap around me, familiar as a sin. Nyx hovered at my shoulder again. The scent game went from background radiation to tolerable ache. I built a firewall around my spine and pretended I didn't care that my hands felt warmer where his gaze landed. It's almost pretty, he said, watching the code unfurl. The way you do it. Flattery won't get you admin, I said, tapping a window open. Bribery might. Noted. We fell into a rhythm. I asked for access. He granted it. I made the network behave. He pretended the network had always behaved. The city lifted its morning voice outside, sirens threading the base of traffic. The robe slid on my wrist when I reached. His breath ghosted my temple when he leaned to look. My pulse did the stupid thing again. At some point, our hands went for the same key. Skin to skin, a fraction. The spark was not metaphorical. It bit, tiny and bright, like the universe licking a finger and touching a live wire. My breath left in a sound I hoped was a laugh. His didn't leave at all. He withdrew first, precisely, as if he'd placed his hand in a flame and then decided flames were beneath his notice. Careful, he said, not looking at me. With electricity? With pretending. I swallowed the ache, compacted it into a joke, and smiled at the screen. You still tremble when I smile, I said, softer than I meant to. Silence. The kind that wants to be an answer. When I finally glanced up, his gaze had traveled to the window. The city wore the last of the mist like a veil. His fingers, steady, always, were almost steady. He hid the almost by reaching for his glass of water and lifting it with exquisite, unnecessary care. Lunch at 1, he said. Is that an order? An invitation? I'm terrible at those. I know, he said, and left the room before my heart could remember how to behave. He called it a stain. I called it proof I'd once been stupid enough to care. Morning leaned through the glass walls of his office like it owned the sky. The place smelled like metal and money, clean lines, colder coffee, a paperweight so sharp it could have signed its own contracts. I took the chair across from Nyx and tried not to look like a man who hadn't slept. He stood at the window and looked like a verdict. His gaze dropped to my wrist when I reached for the mug. The robe was gone now. Thin cotton didn't bother to hide the thin pale line that circled the inside of my wrist like a rumor. It had been red once, bright enough to shame. Now it was just a scar that remembered the color. A reminder, he said softly, of what you are. Interesting, I said, and turned the wrist so it faced the light. An exhibit in a museum I hated. You never asked who put it there. You just decided it was me. The air changed pressure by a hair. He left the window, walked back behind the desk, didn't sit. The coffee between us went cool. What else was I supposed to decide? He asked, something that required more thought. I took a sip and grimaced. The coffee was a threat now. You know, for a man who amortizes risk down to the decimal, your emotional math is a little sloppy. His mouth twitched, not a smile, a sign of stress, or maybe restraint, being taxed. You betrayed me. I saved you. From what? I looked at him like it should have been obvious. From you. He didn't blink, and then he did. And then, something moved under his skin like a fish deciding whether to surface. The city murmured on the other side of the glass, trucks like slow thunder, streetlights giving up for the day. I set the mug down carefully so that the sound of ceramic meeting glass didn't count as violence. You want the story? I asked. I want the truth. Those aren't always neighbors. Today, they are. I leaned back. Let the chair creak on purpose. Imperfection in a room that refused to make any on its own. Fine. 3 years ago, the warehouse had pretended to be anonymous by wearing every cliché it could find. Corrugated metal, 1 door, 2 cameras, 0 charm. Inside, the syndicate hung its intimidation like Christmas lights, tables with money stacked into geometry. Men with knives they didn't know how to use, a smell of sweat trying to bully the smell of bleach. I stood behind a cheap folding table with a laptop that could have been a bomb. Nyx stood to my right, sleeves rolled to forearms that didn't understand. Compromise, reading the contract like it had personally offended him. We were selling something you can't name without being complicit. Access. A slice of the city's nervous system in exchange for a promise they'd never keep. Now, he murmured. And it wasn't an order. It was gravity. Here is something I hadn't told him. 3 hours earlier, a whisper on a burner line had threaded its way into my good ear. Someone on the syndicate side wasn't buying access. They were buying a coffin. Their man at the back with the bland face and the perfect shoes had altered the failsafes in a way that only looks like incompetence if you don't know how to read malice. Here is something else I hadn't told him. The scar on my wrist had been itching for a week, hot when I was near his code, hotter when I wasn't, not because I'd put it there, because someone had designed it to burn when it recognized the scent and signature of its maker. It was a leash you couldn't see until you tried to pull away. He signed, they countersigned. My cursor hovered over execute and chose another verb. I swapped the package, not the shell. We needed the optics, not the front end. They could load their little blessing and feel like kings. Deep in the scaffolding where the watchdogs nap, I altered a single instruction, so that when their side slipped the key in, the lock looked back. If they tried to tunnel past the handshake to the part where Nyx's personal network pulsed, the current would trip and the room would stop pretending to be safe. Do it, Nyx said, not looking at me, because he trusted me then in the way that makes men stupid. I executed. There's a sound good servers make when they're doing what they were born to do, soft, like a cat stretching. There's another sound they make when someone has lied to them cleverly, sharp, like a string snapping on a violin. The perfect shoes man smiled early. It died on his face. The power hiccuped, lights jittered, and a vent in the back wall coughed smoke like a confession. Someone shouted. Two someones went for guns. Nyx's hand caught the back of my neck and pushed down. I pulled the kill string and let the system do what the system had been promised. Protect the core at the expense of the edges. The explosion wasn't cinematic. It was mean. It bit the back room first, where the syndicate kept its real engines, a rack of compromised routers wired to a failsafe that now thought safe meant redecorate in shrapnel. Sound hit blood. Time became math. Nyx moved me. I moved code. The perfect shoes man moved toward a blade he'd left under the table and didn't get there. When the smoke stopped arguing, we were both on the floor, ears full of bees, surrounded by men reconsidering their life choices and one body that had made its last bad decision. Are you hurt? Nyx asked, voice thin and furious. Only in the pride, I said, which was not true, because the mark on my wrist felt like someone had poured liquid metal into it. The syndicate boss, wide watch, wider smile, stared at the destroyed back room, and then at me like I'd crawled out of the fire carrying a confession. You, he hissed. He switched it. Nyx stood up so calm you could hear the ceiling reconsider falling. He straightened his cuffs. We'll be leaving, he said. Thank you for your hospitality. Guns argued with the concept. The boss laughed, because some men practice mirth in mirrors. You walk out only if I say you walk, Rowland. Nyx's eyes slid to me. He didn't ask what I'd done. He asked if I was done. Almost, I said, and sent the last command. Every camera in the building looped to an empty feed. The front doors unlocked with a polite click. The sprinklers belatedly remembered their job and drenched everything that could catch fire and some things that couldn't. In the chaos, we walked, not ran, walked. In the car, he didn't speak for 2 blocks. Then very gently, like he didn't want to wake the sleeping animal in his chest. What did you do? I moved a target, I said. From what to what? From my boss's heart, I said, to their money. He stared through the windshield at a red light that had opinions about time. The mark on my wrist burned like a lie catching up. He didn't see it. He saw spreadsheets where my face should have been. You cost me millions, he said finally. I saved your life, I said, and tried not to sound like I needed him to admit it. He didn't. The light turned green. We went with it. 2 days later, the rumor hit the sector that I'd switched sides. 2 days after that, the mark on my wrist changed color in a way that let everyone know what team I allegedly played for. I vanished because sometimes the only way to prove you're not a traitor is to accept the uniform and walk off stage. Now, in his office, I flexed my hand as if the scar still had heat. It had memories. Sometimes that's worse. Nyx's face didn't give me anything at first. Then it gave me too much. The careful mask he wore to boardrooms and funerals loosened at the edges, and I saw the man who sat up last night and watched me type because he couldn't not. You could have told me, he said. No edge. Just bone. Would you have believed me? The pause took the long way through him. No. He sat then, slowly, like the act cost more than it used to. His fingers steepled, then unclasped, then found the coffee and didn't drink. The city kept pretending it didn't know our names. I called it a stain, he said, looking not at me but at the scar. Because it was easier than calling it a mark I didn't understand. You designed a world where you understand everything, I said gently. And then you met me. His laugh was breath on glass. They're gone. I don't like not knowing. I noticed. Silence pooled, not hostile. Tired. A good tired. The kind that follows a truth finally doing its job. I don't forgive you, he said after a while. Not yet. I didn't ask. But He stopped. The sentence had too many exits. You regret believing the worst, I offered. It's a start. His eyes met mine, naked for one dangerous heartbeat. Then the lid dropped. The room remembered itself. He set the coffee aside. Useless. We have work, he said. We do, I agreed, and stood. My knees did not buckle. I am still proud of that. At the door, he said, so quiet I almost missed it. You saved me. Habit, I said. From me, especially from you. We looked at each other through the thin, bright morning. The roles we'd rehearsed for 3 years tore along an old seam. Something new looked through. Lunch at 1, he said, like he needed a normal sentence to end the abnormal ones. An invitation? I asked. A fact. I nodded and left before we said anything kinder than the room could hold. Funny thing about hunters, once they catch you, they have nowhere left to run. Nyx disappeared on a Tuesday that felt like a held breath. No note, no schedule block, just the echo of doors that didn't slam and the absence of a scent my body had learned to pretend it didn't notice. The penthouse, suddenly too large, clicked inside as if it had its own lungs. The city outside wore a damp veil. The drizzle turned the glass into a watercolor of our empire. He left the cage open. I tried the elevator again because ritual is another kind of superstition. Mr. Park and Mr. Park were gone. Their replacements had the same posture, different cheekbones. The panel still had no buttons. I pressed the seam anyway. It didn't open. I pressed my tongue to the back of my teeth and laughed at myself without sound. Back in the study, the network purred. I didn't have to work. I did anyway. Busy hands keep foolish minds from writing emails to the past. I traced the redundancies I'd installed, the ones that would keep his system breathing if the city tried to choke it. I found a new vulnerability buried deep and fixed it before I could decide it was someone else's job. I documented the fix, my future self deserves the courtesy, and left a line of text in a comment where only I would look. You idiot. You stayed. I made coffee that tasted like penance and walked the perimeter with the mug. Rain threaded itself across the glass. I watched my reflection ghost along. The windows, as if a thinner version of me lived in the outside air. I counted the cameras again, then told them good afternoon, then told myself to stop anthropomorphizing surveillance. I could have left. 3 years of practice had taught me how to evaporate. Use the service stairs, bribe a man who thinks he's not bribable, ride an HVAC shaft like a rumor. My palms itched at the math of it. My feet didn't move. 3 years I ran from the thing I wanted to save. I said it out loud, because some truths only count when they hear themselves. The penthouse swallowed the sentence and made no comment. On the second day, I cooked eggs I didn't want and ate them because bodies are rude about needing fuel. I returned to the study and wrote a patch that would auto-decapitate camera loops, in a pattern I'd seen the syndicate toy with, then tested it until it held. I considered writing Nyx a message. I didn't. Words can be weapons or evidence or both. I left the message where it always lived, in a better system than yesterday's. On the third day, sleep found me early and left me mid-sentence. I woke on the couch with the taste of rain in my mouth and the cheap ache of dreams I refused to catalog. The city smudged itself into mourning. I showered. I dressed without sarcasm. I tied the robe tighter than usual, then swapped it for a hoodie because I didn't want to think about what silk meant. The door opened at noon, not dramatic, not sheepish. A sound like a file closing. Nyx stepped in, and the quiet changed species. He looked thinner, not physically, like the mask he wore to himself had slipped, and he hadn't found a mirror to fix it. His tie was missing. His sleeves had surrendered. He smelled like too much rain and not enough sleep. "You should have said something," he said, and the exhaustion in his voice made the sentence a bridge instead of a blade. "You should have listened," I answered, gently enough that it surprised us both. We stood there, like two men on either end of a table nobody wanted to flip. The city scraped its throat outside. He ran a hand through his hair. It ignored him. "Where did you go?" I asked. "Everywhere that told me what I already knew," he said, "and nowhere that told me what I needed. Poetic for noon, late for regret." I huffed, because breath had to do something. "I didn't leave," I said, as if he couldn't smell that all over the place. "I noticed," he said, then quieter. "Why?" "Because I'm either a masochist or an optimist," I said. "Possibly both. Also, your network can't be left alone for 5 minutes without flirting with disaster." "Jealous," he murmured, and let the ghost of a smile live and die on his mouth. We migrated to the kitchen on a truce of muscle memory. I set water to boil, as if any of this could be made simple by steam. He leaned against the counter and watched my hands like they were data. I opened my mouth and shut it, because the first 4 sentences auditioning were unhelpful. "You should have said something," he tried again, as if repetition could be a new argument. "You should have listened," I repeated, because symmetry is satisfying and sometimes cruel. His jaw flexed. He folded and unfolded his arms, then abandoned the posture as theatrical. I spent 3 days asking the wrong questions. "Congratulations," I said. "That's called being a person." "You should have said the right thing 3 years ago," he said, suddenly raw, like a scab misjudging a shirt. "You should have been someone who could hear it," I snapped back, the heat fast, then gone, leaving a sting. We let the kettle write static between us. I poured water. It hissed. He didn't move. "I don't do this," he said finally, not looking at me. "I don't," he gestured vaguely, encompassing the kitchen, the weather, the shape of regret. "I make decisions. They hold. I don't pick them up later to see if they feel different." "I know," I said. That was the problem. He exhaled through his nose. "You infuriate me." "You're my worst bug," I said, and we both laughed, small and incredulous. Pain makes decent comedy if you stop charging tickets. We took our cups to the table and sat like grown men who had not, in fact, grown enough. He stared into his tea like it owed him dividends. I stirred mine, as if I could turn it into courage. "I didn't tell you because I didn't trust you," I said. "Not with me. Not then. I didn't listen because I trusted myself," he said. "Too much." "Congratulations again," I said. "You're still a person." His eyes lifted, and for a moment they were not the weapon I had learned to dodge, but something embarrassingly human. "You could have left," he said. "I tried," I said, and nodded at the window, the city, the elevator, my own stupid heart. "I failed." We let quiet sit with us. It didn't feel like punishment. It felt like the part of a song that knows it has a chorus coming. "I went to the warehouse," he said abruptly. My spine straightened. "Why?" "To look at the scorch marks," he said, "to ask a room for a story. And it told me you were right," he said, "and that I was late." The heat in my chest was humiliating. I swallowed it like medicine and pretended it tasted like coffee. "I didn't do it to be right," I said. "I did it to keep you breathing." "I know," he said, and the 2 words were a hand offered palm up across a table we hadn't flipped. We circled the same argument until it wore new paths. His, "You should have said," softened to a, "I wish you had." My, "You should have listened," gentled to a, "I wish you could have." Somewhere between the wishes, the air remembered how to be air. He stood first. "You're staying," he said, not as an order or a threat, but like he'd discovered a weather report. "For now," I said. "Don't get sentimental. I'll develop allergies." He nodded, like he would schedule my allergies for 4th quarter. At the doorway to the study, he paused. Dinner at 7? Is that an order? A peace offering? I'm terrible at those. I know, he said, and there it was again, something almost warm wearing his voice. He took a step toward me. I didn't move away. The scent of him was a memory I no longer had to fight like a fire. We stood close enough that my heartbeat invited his to a duel, and both lost. He reached out, then reconsidered, then let his hand land lightly on the back of the chair beside me. A compromise, disguised as furniture. You should have said, he whispered, like the argument needed one last lap to feel complete. You should have listened, I whispered back, because I'm predictable in all the ways that keep me from being safe. He smiled, small, ruinous, and shook his head. You infuriate me. You're my worst bug. Fix me, he said. I'm not tech support, I said. Try anyway. I looked at his outstretched, not touch, at the city braiding itself into another wet afternoon, at the empty space inside me that had stopped echoing quite so loudly. I already started, I said. We made it to dinner. We did not talk about absolution. We didn't need to. The hunt had turned around without asking for permission, and the man who used to chase me had nowhere left to run except toward me. He made the mark that ruined me, and now he's trying to erase it like it was a typo. The security lab lived beneath the tower like a heartbeat. Low light, the hush of expensive ventilation, a clean tang of ozone that stung the back of my throat in a way that said, here, electricity has opinions. Holographic interfaces slept in stacked panes above the main console, faint grids waiting to be coaxed into meaning. The floor hummed. The air had the color of steel left out in moonlight. Nyx keyed us in without ceremony. The door sealed behind us with that particular expensive silence I was beginning to associate with him. Nothing slammed, everything decided. He didn't speak. Neither did I. We took the long way across the room, around racks of hardware dressed up as sculpture, until the central platform woke under our steps and the glass blossomed with data. My scar itched. Right wrist. The same itch that had haunted me for months after the mark turned red, then faded into a quieter cruelty. Memory is just pain with better social skills. Nyx stood on the other side of the console and stared through me at his systems as if truth might render like a layer he'd forgotten to toggle. His sleeves were rolled, forearms drawn tight, jaw set in the particular line that means a man is about to do something he fears and doesn't know how to stop. Say it, I said. He didn't flinch. Maybe he couldn't afford to. Not in here, not now. The mark, he said, voice steady like a measured dose. It was designed by me, designed, not invented by the universe, not bestowed by fate, designed. He didn't wait for permission to keep ruining himself. I created it to tag my core team in the network. A signature woven into access protocols, bonded to scent and biometric patterns. He met my eyes at last, and the glass behind him filled with equations that looked like guilt. When you changed the code that night, it registered as a hostile fork. My system treated you as a threat and broadcast the tag to the network in the only color that read across every channel. Red, I said, and the word felt old and sharp on my tongue. A censure. A warning, he said. A stain. He swallowed, then forced it. A mistake. Silence pooled between us, deep and cold. The consoles purred softly, like the room was trying to soothe a child it didn't know how to hold. I didn't come closer. I didn't step back. So all this time, I said, not a question, you hated what you made. He didn't look away. All this time, I hated what I made of you. Truth, when it's too big for the room, makes the air feel thin. I took one breath like a sip and put the glass down before it shattered. You could have told me, I said, working for calm and getting something honest instead. You could have said, I branded you because I built a system that doesn't know mercy. I didn't know how to doubt myself, he said. The line of his shoulders changed, a give I'd never seen. Not until you disappeared. I let myself look at him, really look, without reaching for a joke to hold the gaze up. The night in the warehouse, the aftermath, the rumors, the man behind the title who slept less and watched more, and told himself that certainty was a virtue, not a chain. "Congrats," I said softly. "You learned." "Late," he said. "Still counts." He exhaled. Not quite a laugh. Not quite anything but human. "I can remove it," he said, moving closer to the console. He touched the glass and the lab came alive. Lines, nodes, a skeletal model of the city's nervous system, and within it a smaller, brighter thread, the tag architecture. He isolated a signature. Mine. We run a reversal on the broadcast table, purge the mark from every mirrored record, then overwrite the biometric associations. Physically, too. He glanced at my wrist, like it owed him an apology. "We can burn it out." The scar throbbed, a phantom heat. I turned my arm and studied the pale ring that circled my skin like a rumor grown tired. 3 years of being a cautionary tale. 3 days of unbecoming it. Erasing would feel good. Too easy, a quieter part of me said. Too clean. "No," I said. His eyes lifted, sharp. "No? Leave it," I said. "Digitally, sure. Clean the records, kill the broadcast, rewrite your tables. But the scar stays." His brows pulled together. "Why?" "Because I want to remember," I said, and heard the thread of something raw in my voice. "Not the pain. The choice. Your choice to blow a hole in my deal?" "My choice to believe you were worth the blast radius," I said, meeting him with it. "No shield, no silk. And your choice to believe the worst and live with it. I don't want to forget either of us." He stared like a man who'd come prepared to be punished, and was now being offered something harder. "You want a reminder. I want a record," I said, "of what we were. So we have a baseline if we ever want to be better." Silence again, but it didn't feel empty. The lab's light changed, an algorithmic dawn cycling under the glass. On the display, my signature pulsed once, as if asking for permission to be named something else. Nyx nodded. The motion looked like it had cost him pride and given him back a kind of relief. "We'll clear the network," he said. "But the scar is yours." "Always was," I said. He worked then, and I worked with him. Old choreography, new song. He exposed the broadcast ledger. I tunneled into the shadow copies and salted their earth. He revoked the red key from the trust registry. I wrote a patch that would throw an alert if any future system tried to color a man's loyalty without asking him first. It wasn't pretty code. It was honest. At one point, our shoulders nearly touched. There wasn't room for distance and precision at once. I felt his heat like a weather report. Something moving in, slow and inevitable. The scent of him had softened since the morning. Less blade, more oak after rain. We finished the purge and watched the last crimson flags wink out across the map, one by one, like a city turning off its fires. The console chimed, small and satisfied. "Done," he said. It sounded like the word he'd wanted for 20 different problems, and never had. I looked at my wrist again, and imagined the red that wasn't there. "Not undone," I said. "Changed." He nodded once. "Changed." We let the quiet be quiet. No negotiation, no scoreboard. The lab breathed. The city, far above, drew a slow line of traffic across an arterial. When he reached for my hand, he didn't do it like an alpha taking a thing, or a CEO signing for a package. He lifted it like it might startle, like a bird on a wire, and laid his palm under my wrist without closing over it. A platform, not a cage. A pause, not a pull. "May I?" he asked. The word landed with a weight I didn't expect. I turned my hand, let the scar face him, let the unmarked side warm on his skin. "You may," I said, "because permission can be a ceremony." He didn't stroke the scar. He didn't kiss it. He just held still while the pulse in my wrist remembered itself and stopped trying to fight. His thumb stayed a respectful inch away. The warmth was steady. The steadiness was new. "I'm sorry," he said. Not a performance. Not a plea bargain. A statement. It mattered that he said it in this room where he was most practiced at pretending he never needed to. "I know," I said. "Me too. For the parts that were mine." We stood like that until the lights decided we were furniture and dimmed for power savings. I breathed. He did too, in a rhythm that met mine halfway, and decided to stay. When he finally let my hand go, it was by lifting his palm first so I could choose to leave. I did, slowly, then didn't step away. "We'll have to reissue access for your core," I said, voice coming back from wherever it had watched us. "Without the mark." "We will," he said. "We'll do it right. Try novel things," I said. "Like doubt. Like asking," he returned, and there was that almost smile again, weary and bright. We gathered the last of the code into place, set the watchers to watch the right things, and shut the interfaces down until only our reflections looked back from the glass. He reached toward the wall panel to kill the room's power. I caught his sleeve without planning to, and then let go, because I'm trying to be the kind of man who means it when he chooses. He didn't make me pretend. He simply covered my hand with his for a second. Warm, careful, no one leading, and then stepped back. "Dinner at 7?" he asked, as if the question could hold all the others beneath it. "Is that an order?" I said on reflex. "An invitation," he said. The words sounded clean in his mouth, like the first use of something that might become beloved with wear. "I'm terrible at those," I said. "I know," he said, and turned the lights off. In the dark, the lab was just a room. The mark on my wrist was just skin. The man beside me was just a man. It was almost enough to count as peace. Turns out, redemption tastes a lot like bad coffee and better mornings. Sun found the city again, rinsed clean by the night's rain. The penthouse breathed different, less museum, more home, like someone had opened a window inside the walls. I padded into the study with 2 mugs and a dangerous optimism. On the glass, the interface slept, waiting for the last piece of yesterday's work. Nyx was already there, hair damp from a shower, sleeves rolled to a compromise that looked suspiciously like ease. He took the mug I offered with a quiet, "Thank you," which shouldn't have mattered, and did. "We're down to ghosts," I said, waking the grid. The network bloomed in pale lines and patient dots. Only one pulsing red remnant remained, a mirrored archival node that lived so deep in the system it practically qualified as folklore. "I'll pull the ledger," he said, hands hovering over the console, as if he were asking permission from the room itself. "I'll salt the ground," I said, and reached past him to open a tunnel. Our fingers didn't touch. The urge to make them almost made me laugh. We worked with an efficiency we hadn't earned, and were determined to. He revoked the last legacy key. I crawled the replication chain and unfastened each clasp with ridiculous care. The lab downstairs had been confession. This was absolution done in pajamas. The last red flicker hesitated, then surrendered, then went out. The console chimed, modest and pleased with itself. I leaned back and let the chair tilt just enough to offend his safety protocols. "Look at that," I said, grinning at the blankness where shame used to live. "See? Officially not a traitor, just an idiot." His mouth did that slow, unguarded curve I'd been trying not to catalog. "My idiot," he said. Heat rose under my skin. The good kind, uncomplicated and terrifying. "Dangerous pronoun," I warned. "Fact," he said, and didn't flinch from it. We sealed the session and let the glass go still. The penthouse seemed to exhale. I tried my coffee and regretted it instantly. "This is a crime." "You made it," Nyx pointed out, deadpan. "I sabotaged your taste buds as a preventative measure. I'll file a complaint with the Department of Outcomes." "Please hold," I said. "Your dissatisfaction is important to us." We carried our mugs to the kitchen. Morning pooled on the marble. The city glinted beyond the windows like a body of water pretending to be architecture. I reached for the sugar. He slid it away with the bored grace of a man redirecting a budget. "I had a system," he said. "You had clutter disguised as a philosophy." He adjusted the canisters by an invisible grid. I moved 1/4 inch just to hear his soul click. "Stop that," he murmured. "Exposure therapy," I said, moving it back. "Also, your coffee hierarchy is tyrannical." "Everything is a hierarchy," he said, and I couldn't tell if he was joking until he added, "except the dishwasher." "That's anarchy. You load it like a poet." "I load it like a survivor," I said. The bowls need space to self-actualize. You're unbearable, he said, and the word was affectionate enough to bruise. We ate toast that did not deserve us. He reached for the jam jar at the same moment I did. Our hands brushed. A small static kiss, not the lab's bright spark. Simpler. I pulled back, and for once not out of fear, but because I liked the wanting. Do you still? I started, and then decided to commit. You still tremble when I smile? He looked at my mouth like it contained a thesis. Now, he lifted his mug, let the steam fog his lashes. From caffeine. Liar. Frequently, he said. Less about this. We migrated to the balcony. The air was a mild surprise after so many days of rain, clean with the faint metallic aftertaste of storm. The city spread below, waking and warming, steam rising from rooftops like thoughts escaping. I leaned my elbows on the rail. He stood beside me, not touching, and somehow everything in me felt held. You're quiet, he said. I'm out of jokes, I said. Temporarily. I'll schedule more, he said. Don't, I said, smiling. They don't work on a calendar. He watched the light crawl down the glass skins of neighboring towers. We'll need to reissue access credentials for the core team, he said, because he is who he is, even at the edge of tenderness. We'll do audits, training, remove the mark dependency entirely. Teach them how to doubt, I said, and how to ask. He nodded. You'll help. Observation or order? Invitation, he said. And it didn't sound like he'd learned the word last night. It sounded like it had found a place to live. Then yes, I said. We fell into a pocket of companionable silence, the kind with a heartbeat. He took a breath that seemed to land lower in his body than usual, as if the air had decided to settle inside him instead of passing through. I'm sorry, he said again, much later, the words under his breath like, a vow you don't say to hear yourself, but to keep yourself honest. I know, I said. Me too. He glanced at my wrist, the pale ring that wasn't leaving. Does it? No, I said. Not today. Good. We finished the bad coffee with ceremonial stubbornness. He offered to make better. I refused on principle. We compromised by agreeing he'd buy a machine that didn't sound like an apology, and I would stop rearranging his spice rack by age instead of alphabet. You'll fail, he predicted. Already have, I said, and let the wind sit on my tongue a moment longer than necessary. Back inside, he pulled up a calendar and began blocking in responsible rectangles. Meetings, training, lunch with someone I used to hate on his behalf. He sent an email that started with team and didn't use the word mark once. I pretended to read over his shoulder and then actually did, which is the kind of progress therapists charge large sums to identify. Dinner at 7? He asked, eyes still on the screen. An invitation? An expectation, he said. Then, because he's learning, also an invitation. I'm terrible at those. I know, he said, and the smile was the kind that doesn't ask for permission. He closed the laptop. The penthouse clicked back into its quieter self. In the reflection on the window, we looked like a possibility. Come here, he said. I didn't move. He didn't either. We both laughed at ourselves, which might be the purest form of proof that something has changed. When we did cross the room, it was small and ordinary. I touched his wrist, the one that used to wear a watch like armor. He touched the edge of my hoodie, a question disguised as fabric. We stood like that long enough for the moment to choose us back. No collars, no chains, just a man who had learned to doubt and another who had decided not to disappear. Later, when he went to his calls and I went to mine, and the day built itself as if it always had this shape, I found a sticky note near the console in my own handwriting from yesterday. You idiot. You stayed. I turned it over and wrote, You're welcome. On the balcony again, the city breathing easy, I touched the scar on my wrist and felt, finally, nothing but skin. The air smelled like damp concrete and hope. Inside, Nyx said something to a person who used to terrify me, and the sound of his voice made the room warmer. He doesn't hold me, and I don't leave. Maybe, for the first time, I'm actually free.